Hey everybody, my name is Geoff Livingston. I'm CEO of Generative Buzz. I'm with my friend Kathleen Featherington, Vice President of AI Federal for Maximus. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you.
So how have you enjoyed the conference so far? Are you having fun?
I am. It's such a great conference, and being able to get such insights from different government leaders and the different exposure to the different types of use cases and problems.
So I have to admit, I kind of did some sneaking around on LinkedIn to get ready to talk to you, and I looked at Maximus. Obviously a very sizable company, more than 10,000 people, closer to 20 if I'm right.
Yep.
I was kind of wondering, I know that you do a lot of work in the federal sector, but how do you guys support government with AI in particular?
Yeah, no, great question. So Maximus has actually been around since 1975. So in different capacities of really helping in terms of whether it's workflow problems, business problems, trying to get the actual mission and frontline parts things done. So with that, that's evolved. A lot of those types of things are really hard data problems, as well as that need and require bringing in like analytics and AI. So for us, we're constantly seeing how we can do it, but very heavy with a mission understanding. So whether it's for customer experience or the actual workflow itself, like how can we optimize it, how can we get the results, and how can we enable humans to do what they're inherently good at? So it's just like critical thinking and creativity.
I like creative thinking. So generative has been really impactful, but in some ways it's been like almost like El Nino, right? So wild and all over the place and all the headlines. How can governments safely utilize AI and in particular generative?
Yeah, so I think it goes along the lines, if you think of AI at large, it's new, but there's different types. And I think the easiest way to describe about doing it safely is what is a fundamental difference about generative versus some of the existing AI that's been around. Traditional software has been designed to be very deterministic, meaning input goes in, same output comes out. With generative, you have input goes in, but maybe not the same output. So that probabilistic nature comes into it. So because of that, some of the things that have been designed for traditional software development need to evolve. And so that you're able to do much more of monitoring when the models shift. What does that look like? So that leads us to the government side of this is, how do we think about like some of the unglamorous sides of it too, of the architecture and the infrastructure? How do we put in place to be able to test and validate what's happening, what data is being used, but what's the actual operations of the model? Is it working? How is it functioning? And alerting, is it shifting? So then you have the governance side, of course, of what and how, and should you be using it, and is it right for the use cases? But thinking about that part and how to put it more in for enterprise scale is really parts of how do you start being able to do it small and then scale it out, because you don't want to just build something for a small and then have it never be able to scale to the enterprise.
Speaking of building things without necessarily thinking them all the way through, that's been a story with this generative boom, and maybe an unfortunate story. We saw that with the whole interesting thing that went down with OpenAI and the Altman hire and fire thing that went down, and that was really a battle about ethical AI in a lot of ways with the board. And obviously the government has a very strong take on responsible AI and ethical AI. Can you first of all define what responsible AI is, and then talk a little bit about your position on that and how it impacts government?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, taking responsible AI, there's a lot of terms that are put into that category, whether it's ethical, transparency, accountability, you name it, all of them in. But for us, it really means thinking it through in terms of what are the impacts, what's the scale, how is it being used, and asking fundamental questions like, should it? Just because it can doesn't mean it should. So how do we do that, and how do we know and put in not only just guidelines of straight ethics, but technical controls and measures that can help us see about it? Because there's things like statistical relevancy. There's a really big difference of using a model to recommend something as simple as clothing or t-shirts or something I might like versus precision medicine and something that might cause lethality. So having the understandings, but the other part is having the understandings of how do they actually function, and not everybody needs to be a hardcore coder or things like that, but they really should understand what are the outputs and where do those outputs come from. So like if they're shifting, does that shift your opinion of like what decision you would make? So building those parts in, and if you don't have that, probably not a good thing to use. And then it was mentioned today in some of the talks, who are the users and what is their knowledge base in terms of understanding as well?
So it sounds like a lot of that's thinking through governance in the beginning, right? Really making sure that you're seeing the long game rather than just building because you can build.
Design for scale. So design for the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of really good intentioned people and they'll be like, oh, we can reuse it for this. Understand that that's most likely going to be a possibility from the beginning.
Okay, very cool. So before we chatted, we had a little side chat in the beginning, and I was talking about how the chief AI officer has been kind of one of the higher visibility items that have come out of that Biden executive order. How long do you think it's going to really take for them to get AI officers on board at the major agencies? I think you had mentioned it's contingent on the CFO Act. And what's your general take on how the executive order is coming along?
I mean, I think one of the interesting things about the executive order is that it put due dates. It put very clear due dates from like 30 to 365 days. So that actually kind of forces the conversation. But there was a lot of pre-coordination done, and that's also a really good thing. So you started to see at least one or so agencies started to name theirs. There's also other agencies that already have some. So they either have the title already, or they were doing complementary areas, so you're going to probably see them in there. In terms of getting all of the parts that they need to be effective up and running, I think that's going to be a little longer. So while the executive order, I think it has listed about 60 days to name one, then you have the parts of where they really go to work of setting up the governance councils and the parts too. So honestly, I think that's probably at least within the next year or so to get a better handle on just where are they at in the agency and what's next and what's needed.
Very, very cool. So obviously one of the things that Chief AI Officer highlights is the importance of talent. Yeah. And we all know that government has a hard time hiring tech talent. So with that in mind, I mean, it makes sense to me that a lot of the AI work is going to be done with contractors like you. How do you see the contracting community, in particular Maximus, really helping the government accelerate its AI adoption?
Yeah, I see it in a critical role. Because of the fact where you have companies that are going across all different types of sectors, different problems, it gives a type of purview of what could be some of those larger implications. You also have companies like ours who are using it internally and also using it in our own operations and functions. There's a lot of lessons learned to be had there, and I think that part, not only the talent itself, but sharing it. So look, it's no secret that the government has to go through their very rigorous, job structures, profiles, the setup of those to even be able to hire them in. Industry doesn't have that issue, so it can move a little bit more quickly to get the type of talent that's needed.
Very cool. So I have a question that I'm asking everybody. Improv. You can punt on it if you want to. Yeah. But my mom was an astrologer, and so I can't help but always think of the future.
Yeah.
What is your crystal ball prediction for AI in 2024?
I think so. Where we've been so far was about if you were going to use AI. We've passed that now. We're now into how. So I think a good portion of it is going to be how do you efficiently do it, how do you bring it in, and how do you create that scaffolding that will allow people to do all the things that they're good at, because not everybody's going to be a perfect software engineer and the things too. So that's the parts. I read this morning online a lot of articles about large vision models coming out. So, it's the next evolution. That one's going to be a lot harder because that's not language-based. That's, you got a whole bunch of niche areas of it too. So I think it's an exciting time, but it's going to be how do you build it within the right structure?
Outstanding. Thank you for your time. Where can people find you, by the way?
It can find me on LinkedIn under Kathleen Featheringham, or and we have all of our information on Maximus.com.